What's up, y'all? How you doing? And once again, welcome back to the channel. So, as you are all no doubt well aware, yesterday the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Infringement decided to drop their latest unconstitutional overreach in the form of their new pistol brace rule. Now, for those of you who are unaware or are just uninitiated or new to the firearms community, the pistol brace, which is this little thingy right here, this has been around for probably about 15 or so years, about since the early 2000s. Somebody can correct me down in the comments. And what this was originally designed to do was to allow a disabled veteran or someone who has, say, only one arm, or one arm doesn't work so well, or any other disabled person or someone with a serious injury to be able to lift, aim, and properly fire an AR-15, AK-47, or a similarly platformed weapon. And I remember a few years ago, this is back when I was first getting into the tactical stuff, we had quite a little go around with the ATF. ATF at first said, no, these are illegal. You cannot have them unless you are an actual disabled person or disabled veteran. Then we had a little go around where, can you shoulder it or not? And of course, for the last 10 or so years, the ATF has said, yes, you can. But before that, for about a year or so, they went back and forth between, yes, you can, no, you can't, you're a felon, no, it's legal, you're still a felon, whatever. And now they have decided that, after much argument, and I'm sure much careful deliberation among their own ranks, wink wink, that if you have one of these attached to your AR-15 or AK-47 or Galil Ace or whatever, if you have one of these attached to your pistol, which under the ATF's previous rules, this would have been considered a pistol if it had the brace on it, you're now a felon. Unless you register this as a short barrel rifle with the ATF under the National Firearms Act. They are giving you 120 days to do this tax-free. If you try to do it after the 120 days, one, you're going to be automatically a felon because you now have an unregistered short barrel rifle. And also, if you want to keep said short barreled rifle, you're going to have to register it and pay your $200 extortion tax stamp in order to register this item with the ATF. Can you see the problem here? You see, also for those who are uninitiated or unaware, according to current firearms laws under the National Firearms Act of 1938, any rifle that has a barrel length of less than 16 inches, this particular item is a 12.5-inch barrel. If you have a barrel less than 16 inches, which is the legal limit for a rifle barrel, that is considered a short barrel rifle, and it's considered illegal. If you own such a weapon, you are required by law to register this under the NFA with the ATF and pay a $200 tax stamp in order to get permission from your government to exercise an enumerated constitutional right. Now, just to show an example of what an actual rifle under their definition looks like, that's going to be this little baby right here. As you can see, this barrel is quite a bit longer. And the way the ATF measures barrel length is it goes from the front of the bolt head to the end of the barrel threads. So technically this muzzle device, unless it is pinned and welded permanently attached to this barrel, this does not count as part of the actual barrel. Only from the barrel threads down to the face of the bolt head does it count as actual barrel length. So this is the legal length of a rifle, so therefore I can have a stock, an actual butt stock. This doesn't move. This is a fixed one. You can have one of the adjustable ones. You are allowed to have a butt stock on a legal length rifle, or of course if a barrel is longer than this. They have similar rules for a shotgun, like this one right over my shoulder. This one is an 18-inch barrel, which is the legal limit. Now, if it were less than 18 inches, that would be a short barrel shotgun and would also have to be registered. Other items that have to be registered under the NFA include suppressors or fully automatic weapons, which of course are almost impossible to get and impossibly expensive if you do go through the paperwork. Now, another option the ATF is giving us for our pistols, or as they're now calling them, short barrel rifles, is either we can do what I previously said and register these with the ATF, in which case that's just a backdoor illegal gun registry, which is strictly prohibited on not only the Constitution itself, but in earlier laws which predate the ATF itself. But also we have the option to turn these into the ATF. No, I'm not kidding. So they're giving you the option of either an illegal backdoor gun registry or an illegal backdoor gun confiscation, in order to prevent you, as an owner of one of these items, and myself, of course, from becoming a federal felon, punishable by about $15,000 in fines and no less than 5 years in prison, according to the National Firearms Act. Now, there's another option, which is just to this thing will take your brace off. Now, unfortunately, this is still considered an AR pistol, meaning that you can't shoulder it like this. Notice I am not actually shouldering it. Yes, I know, ATF, you are watching. You are not allowed to shoulder the buffer tube, which houses the buffer that's necessary to the operation for this weapon. Also, technically, under the new laws which are under consideration with the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, this red dot sight, this light, this angled foregrip, all of these would have been previously legal in the previous configuration that I just had this weapon in. In this current configuration, if all these proposed bills were to pass, this would be highly illegal. I would still be a felon, because I cannot hold this and easily fire it with one hand. It also is over the weight limit. It is capable of accepting a 30-round magazine. Now, of course, yes, YouTube, this is a 25-rounder, just for your purposes. Anything over 10 rounds in the proposed laws. Now, fortunately, I live in the great state of Missouri, where we have something called the Second Amendment Preservation Act. All my fellow Missourians out there, represent. Now, the wording of the SAPA in our state says that any future unconstitutional or biased gun laws passed by the federal government do not apply in the state of Missouri. We're one of only a handful of states that currently have that kind of law. Now, whether that law will allow me to keep my brace and not become a federal felon remains to be seen. Now, as for myself, I do not intend, this thing's not cooperating, I do not intend to destroy this, or turn it in, or register it. If push comes to shove, I can do what I just did, take this brace off, chuck it in the trash, put a longer barrel on here, and call it a day. However, as a freedom-loving, gun-owning American who very much knows and is very familiar with his constitutional rights, as you should be, I'm not going to do any of that. Unless I am absolutely forced to do so, I'm not going to do it, and neither should you. Guys, this is exactly the kind of thing as gun owners that we dread. This is a gun owner's worst nightmare. Is, for one thing, for an agency like the ATF to even exist. I mean, seriously, if there's any point in your life when you feel like you are useless, washed up, just antiquated, that there's no reason for you to be around anymore, just keep your chin up and remember that the ATF still exists. But as a freedom-loving gun owner, as a prepared citizen, it is up to you to fight this tooth, claw, and nail. And I'm not saying do anything physical. Yes, YouTube, I know your algorithm is already trying to assault me, and I'm not even monetized, so don't even bother. The problem here is that we need to get out there and we need to talk to our legislators. We need to write our state senators, we need to write our federal senators, we need to write our House representatives. And heck, write anybody that could have any possible inkling of power when it comes to this subject. I'm struggling to keep my words straight because it is just so infuriating that something like this happened. Now, the ATF has been talking about dropping this rule for quite a long time. There's also another one that they're getting ready to drop. It's seen a lot of backlash. Their comments period last year was absolutely blown up with negative comments and backlash. This is also where they're going to try to reclassify parts and frames and receivers as functioning firearms. Now, just to clarify this, again for the uninitiated, parts and frames are this. Like, for instance, if I were to take this gun down, which I'm not allowed to do on YouTube, so give me a moment. There, that's better. This is the frame or receiver of an AR-15. Now, notice that you cannot tell if this is going to be a rifle or a pistol, because that is completely dependent on barrel length. This piece right here, without the buffer tube, without the handle, without the trigger and the hammer and all the pieces that go inside here, just this piece of aluminum right here is considered the firearm. This is the only piece, if you are building your own AR-15, which is still legal for the moment, even though they're going after that too, this is the one and only piece which you have to do a federal firearm or federal backgrounds check on. Because without this one piece, the entire firearm ceases to function. So technically, in the eyes of the law, this is the firearm. What they're trying to do now is reclassify the words frame and receiver to go from meaning just this to all of this. If the ATF has their way, and all the rules they want to put in do go through, which it's looking very much like it will, given that we're living in the Biden administration right now. Not only will this be considered a firearm, but the buffer tube will be considered a firearm. The trigger assembly will be considered a firearm. You look at the rest of the gun. The barrel, the upper receiver, the bolt carrier group, and even a again, try not to get too mad, even a muzzle device, which goes right here on the end of the barrel. Does absolutely nothing except mitigate recoil and hide your flash. Kind of. Those would all be considered finished firearms, would have to be serialized, and potentially could mean that you need to have a background check in order to purchase them. Up until this point, ladies and gentlemen, from the founding of the country to date, you have been 100% allowed to build your own firearms. Don't let anyone tell you different. From the very first day that the settlers landed on Plymouth Rock and started settling the wilderness of New York and Virginia, people have been making their own firearms. America's oldest firearms company, which just recently went out of business, unfortunately, Remington Arms, started from a guy in his shop making flintlock rifles for hunters and settlers. It is absolutely legal. Don't let anyone tell you different. I have heard it way too many times. So, the problem we are facing now is the ATF is basically trying to regulate homemade firearms out of existence. And yes, they call them ghost guns. That is an oxymoron. It is a dumb statement. They're trying to say, can I back up a little bit? The idea of a ghost gun is that it is an unserialized, untraceable, unregistered, unlicensed firearm which someone like me has made in the comfort of their own home or out in their own shop that the government has no tabs on. It was technically never purchased because if you can have say a CNC machine where you can machine one of these frames and receivers out of a solid billet of aluminum or an 80% completed lower, meaning that the lower is 80% done, it's not technically a firearm yet in the eyes of the law. So with your CNC machine, you would just do all the finishing touches and make it into a functioning receiver. That is 100% legal right now. They're trying to make that illegal. Because that solid block of aluminum, with 80% of the cuts done, you just have to do the last 20%, that would be considered a functioning firearm, even though it's literally just a chunk of metal. It could be literally anything. I've seen guys take those 80% blocks and make something completely different with it. Make a paperweight that looks like an AR-15 receiver, make a clock that looks like an AR-15 receiver, do literally anything but make it into a firearm. But since it is in the rough, barely discernible shape of a firearm, according to the ATF, that would be considered a functional firearm with a background check registered under the National Firearms Act. Again, trying to keep my composure here. I apologize if I make a lot of pauses. But that's what the ATF wants. They want to regulate frames and receivers, 80% lowers, all these individual parts. They want to regulate each and every one of them, make them all serialized, make them all have a background check. Now, again, going back to the ghost guns. If you make a frame and receiver out of that billet of aluminum, and then you order all these other parts that you need to complete the functioning gun to your door without any background checks, you can order them off Amazon, order them online, then you have a functioning gun that the government has no idea that it even exists. It has no serial number. It was never purchased. It's never been sold, although you can sell them in some states. That's a problem for the ATF, because apparently freedom is just abhorrent to our government bureaucracies. They're trying to say that ghost guns are used in a vast majority of crimes, when in reality they are not. And I say that because, as usual, when it comes to anything gun-related, they're fudging their numbers. If you do an in-depth look, like myself and other YouTubers have done, what the ATF is doing is they are lumping homemade ghost guns in with actual crime guns that do not have a serial number. The reason most crime guns do not have a serial number is because criminals are smarter than people think, and they take a file, take 15 minutes in a shop with a Dremel tool or some other similar tool, and they file the serial number off. So the gun had a serial number. It probably was legally purchased by someone and then stolen by some criminal, but since it does not currently have a serial number at the time that it was taken into police custody, that is considered a ghost gun, and that ups the numbers of crime guns, which they can call ghost guns. They do the exact same thing with firearm deaths every year when they lump suicides by firearm in with actual gun crime. If you look into the actual stats, just that alone bumps up the number by over 50%. You see what they're doing, guys? They are trying to do on a federal level what states like California, New York, Illinois, all of these different states. Illinois just passed a so-called assault weapons ban, basically banning anything that goes boom and holds more than 12 rounds. That's a whole other subject. I'll do that in a different video. But what they're trying to do on a federal level is to do exactly what they're doing in a lot of states that absolutely hate guns and hate the fact that Americans are legally allowed to own them. They're trying to regulate it out of existence. Making 40 million people potential felons overnight because they own something that has been completely legal and completely just arbitrary for the last 10 years, unless they register it with the federal government, is nothing less than a backdoor gun registry. They've been doing this for a while. Other YouTubers have covered this. You can go watch their videos. I might make one about it in the future. Sorry. But we see what they're doing. We have to fight this, guys. We have to fight this in the courts. We have to fight this in the halls of the legislatures. Go to your state legislator. Go call your senator. Call your representative. Call your governor. Call anybody that can help out with this situation. As I said, us Missourians may or may not be affected by this. If I had to place a bet, I'd say it probably won't affect us that much. Or at the very least, we will fight this in court and fight all the way to the Supreme Court if we have to, or at least we should. We have to do our part, guys. The U.S. Constitution says that we have the unmitigated right to keep and bear arms. We all know the wording of the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, people think that's absolute. It should be absolute. But if you look on the national scale, there are over 10,000 gun laws on the federal level and the state level. 10,000 infringements, which by the exact wording of the Constitution, the text, history, and tradition, which was quoted by Clarence Thomas in the in New York State, I always get this wrong, New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin Supreme Court case. That's what the standard that Clarence Thomas set, and it is upending the entire gun control lobby. All of the anti-gunners out there are scrambling to try to find a loophole, find a way to either circumvent or get around the Bruin decision, because all of a sudden they're realizing that none of the laws they're trying to pass, none of these idiotic rules that they think will save us from the criminals who suddenly follow laws because some anti-gunner told them to, they're suddenly realizing that none of those laws had any basis in text, history, or tradition of this country going back to 1789 when the U.S. Constitution was officially ratified. We need to hold true to that. Because this crap didn't exist. Regulating a piece of a gun because you say that is the actual functional firearm, and then telling people they can't have it, the Founding Fathers would have slapped you across the face for even suggesting that. Regulating a certain type of weapon, but not other weapons, because it's more effective. Again, Founding Fathers would have smacked you for that. Regulating a piece of plastic, because suddenly it makes the gun look scarier. Idiotic. We gotta stand up to this, guys. We gotta get out there, make our voices heard. I hate to use the acronym, or not the acronym, but I hate to use this phrase because I know YouTube's gonna ding me for it. I don't really care. Fight like hell. We have to get out there. We have to do our part. We have to preserve our freedoms. This is Ozark Powler signing off. Stay armed. Stay frosty, my friends.